I've never been that big of a social media person. I use Instagram, I enjoy it, but I mean, I'm private. I have, less than 1,000 followers. I post stories when I'm crying watching reality television. It's more of just to connect with my actual friends. I really don't have people on there that are outside of my circle or outside of my community. I think a big problem is the amount of feedback that you can get from people. I don't think we're supposed to have access to.
Wait. Can you say that one more time, please?
Yeah, I don't think the amount of feedback that we receive is healthy. And a lot of times you're receiving feedback from people that you if you knew them in real life, you might not even care what their opinion was, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
This is more for the era that we live in, right? So we know that we live in a time where social media is very present, ever present, I should say. I am not against it. I think that it can be a great tool for a lot of different things.
Yeah.
However, I also think that based on what I've observed from a lot of people and what they talk about, that we know that sometimes there's comparison complexes that people develop. We also know that sometimes there's a challenge with understanding and appreciating validation that we're getting from people online versus the people that we actually know and that we have allowed to get to know us, right? So with that being said, for you, just based on your experience, not that you need to speak for everybody, what is more important to you? Is it validation from others that don't really have that opportunity to get to know you in that online space? Or is it from the people who you have kind of bare your soul to and allow them to really see the real you?
Yeah, it's definitely my close relationships. I've never been that big of a social media person. I use Instagram, I enjoy it, but I mean, I'm private. I have, less than 1,000 followers. I post stories when I'm crying watching reality television. It's more of just to connect with my actual friends. I really don't have people on there that are outside of my circle or outside of my community. So, I really do seek that validation from people who I care about, and I would respect what their opinion of me would be, right? I think a big problem is the amount of feedback that you can get from people. I don't think we're supposed to have access to.
Wait. Can you say that one more time, please?
Yeah, I don't think the amount of feedback that we receive is healthy. And a lot of times you're receiving feedback from people that you if you knew them in real life, you might not even care what their opinion was, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Please continue, Marissa.
And so the feedback that matters to me is the people that I respect and I care for. And I think we're probably supposed to have just less access. We're probably a little overwhelmed.
I could do nothing but agree with you. I think that's why I talked about the comparison aspect, particularly when you talk about young people. Not to say that older people don't do this, but particularly like prepubescent, adolescent teens.
Yeah.
I think about that as a dad. Like that's the reason why my son has no access to those things, because
so hard.
It's hard enough.
It's hard enough.
It's hard enough trying to figure out who you are, how you feel like you fit, growing into your body.
Let me know when you get
changes.
there.
Right. Like all these things, you're just like
Still trying
one
to
thing
figure
after
it out.
another. The last thing I think that I would need, and thankfully I didn't grow up with it, is going on my phone. I'm looking, I'm scrolling. I'm like, man, this person has this life. This person is doing this. Man, everything seems fantastic. Why the hell is that not my life? Why does my life suck? Why does it seem so insignificant compared to others? And that's the part that I don't like.
Yeah.
That's the part that I push back against and say, we got to remember, another PSA. Everything that we share, and a lot of what we share, majority of the time, what I have seen, you correct me if you feel differently, is it's very tailored, it's very manicured, it's very curated. So it's giving you a certain image of what people want you to see. You're not seeing that stuff that happens behind the scenes. You're not seeing those challenging moments that they go through. You're not seeing them when they're overcoming challenges and adversity, because people don't tend to share that stuff. They share what I always call the highlight reel.
Yeah.
Everything that looks great. Everything's rosy. They never had to go through anything hard. But I know, as a man, as an adult, as a therapist, that is not true. But we don't talk about these things. So how would you know, right, if we don't talk about it? What do you think about that?
It's actually so interesting because, I have cousins in high school and I've talked about this with my friends a lot. Everyone knows that. we all know that it's not real, that it's curated, that it's tailored, and that doesn't matter. Its impact on you is the same. You can be completely aware that all these pictures that these influencers are posting are edited and are filtered, etc., and you still feel bad about yourself. It's something outside of intellectualizing. It's a deeper feeling, and I am so empathetic to the younger generation because it's designed to be that way. It's designed to be addictive. It's designed. The creator of Facebook, right, said he doesn't let his children use Facebook. The creator of TikTok said he doesn't let his children use TikTok. That's saying something, right? And so I think we know it, and it's still just as harmful. And I'm empathetic to people growing up in this generation where that is the norm, and it's addictive, and it feels inescapable.
Yeah, and even, which I don't have, thankfully for me, I don't have an issue with, I would say, being the bad guy in that regard and putting down that boundary.
I think it's important.
Yes, because I think it's more like I will take whatever smoke my son wants to give me and be like,
100%.
Dad, I can't use it. No, you cannot.
Yes.
We'll talk about when we think it's appropriate, but it ain't happening no time soon. Because I'm thinking more about the longevity and how that might impact you and how you see yourself. Again, because I started thinking about this because I would get young clients, maybe 10, 11, 12 years old, male and female, and they would talk about that stuff. And, you know, me not having grown up with it in that way, it's a foreign concept because I have formulated my sense of identity. So not to say I'm not sensitive to them, right? But I didn't have to do it in that public way. Like I was for those that know, I was in the MySpace generation, for those that didn't, like that was popping in high school before Facebook was. That was my generation. So it was different back then versus now. And then of course, you know, we have the phone, so we have access constantly, things being fed to you, notifications, just all that stuff. So I'm very sensitive to how that impacts young people. And at the same time, I always like to talk about the sort of duality of things. Like everything is not good or bad.
Right. Everything's gray.
So there's a lot of the things there that can be useful. I've heard a lot about great community building that can happen, and connection that can happen if you're being intentional about it. Again, being intentional. So I'm certainly not anti it, but these are like some of those more in-depth discussions that I feel like we should talk about a little more openly, so that, for example, in my opinion, I don't have a daughter, I hope to one day, that young women are not feeling like they need to subscribe to these like perfect images, like kind of like what you were describing a moment ago of, I know these things are filtered, so like I'm not supposed to look exactly like them. And then even for the young men, I think for some of them that could be there, or just feeling like they don't measure up, you know, feeling like they're less than, feeling like I don't have as much of those images to share too, so like I guess that I'm not that valuable. Because I think a lot about self-worth, that a lot of these people, when they talk about them, they kind of attach themselves to it, this avatar that we present online, right? So that's one side of the coin. The other side of it, I would say, is when you can get that level of attention and how that might impact the way you actually deal with your people IRL in real life for those relations, right? I try. I'm not that old. I try my best. But you know, like sometimes we take those experiences with what we see and what we can get, and sometimes that distorts our viewpoint of like when you're actually looking at somebody like I'm looking at you right now and have the ability to talk and get to know that person. Maybe it's giving me an inflated sense of ego, or it's giving me a higher sense of self that maybe I really don't need, and I need to be grounded a little bit. Those are some of the concepts that I like really am trying to analyze and understand. Have you seen or heard or paid attention to anything in that realm?
Yes, and I get it. If we as teenagers had access to people complimenting us all the time, are you kidding me? I would eat that up, fork and knife, every freaking night. I'm so grateful that we didn't have that, because I understand why that's addicting and validating. How insecure was I throughout middle school and high school, etc., if people were telling me, you're great, I'm getting all these likes. Do you remember there used to be a thing on like MySpace days, early Facebook days, where it would be like this and I'll give you a number, I'll rate you or something. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Oh, I did that. More than 3 times, I'm sure. That's horrible. First of all, just to put a person on a number scale is like a whole other conversation. But like, I did that, and if I had the access that kids have now, I can imagine needing that hit. needing that
The
validation.
dopamine hit.
Yes. So I'm very empathetic to that. And just like you said, nothing is black or white. I think everything's gray. There's pros, there's community, there's validation. It can help with self-esteem. And at the same time, it can do the exact opposite. It can isolate, it can ruin your self-esteem. It can paint a picture of a life that's not achievable for people. And so there's a balance, right? And it comes back to, I feel like everything we're saying just ties back to the beginning of our conversation of boundaries, right? If you care, you set boundaries. And so how is a way that we can take the good and what was the saying? A therapist told me once, take what you need, leave the rest.
Yeah.
And that just resonates in so many aspects of my life on a day-to-day. And I think that's the best way to approach social media. Take what you need, leave the rest.
I agree, and I've met so many wonderful people, honestly, through social media. Even even having these discussions, and I see how community can be built. Right, you can meet like-minded individuals and really, create some change out here. But yeah, boundaries I'm 100% in favor of. I think that we just need to be more conscious, especially parents. Like, I understand we may not use all this technology, but we need to be aware if our kids want to use it, so that way we understand what appropriate boundaries should be and we don't get like finessed by them, which can totally happen.
They're so smart.
It's gonna totally happen. There's nothing bad that's happening here. It's like, you have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yes.
So I do think we need to be careful about those things. But yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think there's going to be those pros that we can take away from it if we choose to utilize them. And even, I remember like a small boundary I did with a client before. They had this thing where they would check Twitter often, and they would sort of get really upset because they would, obviously get a lot of news, I guess, that would come into their feed that would get them irate. And they're like, yeah, and I just can't get off of it. And I think they use this word. I could be making it up. I think they said they hate scrolled or something like that, some word like that on Twitter. And, I was like, yeah, so how about we, and I started looking into like the settings, and I saw like, hey, there's like a timer that you can put on there to kind of limit how much of this you're consuming per day. And it kind of tells you like, hey, you need to get off.
Yes.
And I was like, hey, let's do that. Let's try that. And that really helped them like understand that, hey, I can access it. Cause I was talking to an adult, this wasn't a minor. I can access as much as I want. But I also understand that the impact is kind of putting me in a bad mood. The way I'm dealing with other people, it doesn't seem like I'm quite in the best mood, or I'm willing to communicate very well with them. And so if I don't take some sort of precaution, like that's going to be more or less my norm. And they were willing to try that, and I saw that was effective. So that could be like a guardrail, so to speak, whether it's with a minor, if you even want them to access it, or even in this case, an adult.
Yeah, I have a screen time limit on my phone. I can't be on for more than 2 hours a day. I leave my phone in the other room. That's the best way to do it.
Okay.
And I was talking to my cousin over the summer, and he pulled his up, and it was like 18 hours of screen time, and that's the norm for high school. And he was like, 2 hours, how do you get anything done? And I was like, 18 hours, how do you sleep? It's just, it's such a different world. But yeah, the boundaries, the self boundaries.
Those are the differences. And listen, I'm with you. This is, again, this is why we have to talk about these things, because to me, actually, I get more excited the more difficult that they are. Not because you're always going to have an answer, to be clear. You don't always end every conversation with a very thought out and concrete answer.
Right.
But it's an opportunity to just explore what you think, right? And then to me, especially, it's like hearing somebody else's perspective. Maybe it affirms what you say, maybe it doesn't. And you have the opportunity to maybe evaluate your position. Maybe you move in a different direction. Maybe you stay where you are. But that's why I like being able to engage in it, because I know that this is very difficult. I know it's very hard for people to say, like, should everybody have access to it? Should nobody have access to it? Should kids have access to it? Should only adults have access to it? Well, is it all good? Is it all bad? No, man. That's all the extreme stuff that we like to put ourselves in, because it's easier to just fall into a camp and ride or die for your camp. Yeah. It's much harder to sit over here and say, there's good over here. I can appreciate those points. There are some points you're making over here. Even if I don't like the majority of other stuff you're talking about, I got to give you credit there. And I like to find those points, because that's where we can have sort of the meeting of the minds. Right. We don't have to just be like extremes dealing with each other.